shed from scratch, but I think we're going to leave that for when we got the whole crew.
Yeah.
John's joining me tonight for a little bit of a live stream here. We're going to be talking about water. And specifically, I'd like to touch on tonight a little bit about water in the wintertime, especially for livestock. But first of all, how's things going on your side of the fence there, John?
Well, it's going fine. The cows are doing good, and that's one thing. I think people have a misconception about cattle and their fragility in the cold weather, but they can take it, and so they didn't bat an eyelash, and as long as they get to water, and even that's not really that much of a problem when there's a lot of snow on the ground, and they get fed, and I kick up their ration of alfalfa pellets, and I gave them some molasses and apple cider and just an additional energy boosters to keep them warm when it gets real cold, but even then, as long as they're able to eat and graze, and I gave them some hay, so they're good, so the impact was negligible, so I'm happy that it didn't become a problem. I mean, I put them in the shed last year, but that's when it was getting down to the single digits, and the wind was blowing, and they're good as long as they don't get wet or they're not in the wind, and they can get into some kind of shelter, even if it's a hedgerow or something. They'll find their way, but they just need a little protection from the wind. But other than that, they're fine. Chickens. I got some ducks too. They just got mad when our pond froze over, so they couldn't get into the pond. So there's a little. It's all melted now, of course, but yeah, my ducks are like yours. They don't. They really don't care about the cold weather. I mean, they just go on about their business. And I was telling you earlier about your other video you did about your ducks, and they're swimming around on the edge of the water, and they don't care and everything. After I first moved out here, I have a bubbler in my pond, an aerator. It just oxygenates the water, and when it gets really cold and freezes over, everything freezes, but where it's bubbling up, right? The water's
Mm-hmm.
constantly moving. So it completely froze over. It was probably 2 to 3 inches thick of ice. It's one of those really cold parts of the winter, and that spot where the bubbler was kept free of ice, and it's just water in there. And I was worried about the ducks. I said it was really cold. It was cold. It was down, like I said, single digits, and they're out there in that water where the bubbler's at, just having a good old time. I'm like, are you not cold? I had food over on the bank for them, and I'm like, can you not get here? You're afraid to go on the ice, and I'm throwing food out on the ice for them, and they could care less. They were just having a good old time in that water, you know. And if you think about it, that water's warmer than the outside air,
Yeah,
so it probably felt good to them. I mean, I don't
yeah,
know
you're
that much
right.
about ducks, but they didn't bat an eyelash. So I don't. In the wintertime, I don't worry about the ducks. I mean, like I said, as long as they got some fresh water they can get into, and food, they're gonna be fine.
Yeah, that's that. The ducks. I was at first because we were getting a lot of snow. I was kind of worried about it, but I kept thinking, I was like, no, because they do waterproof their feathers.
Yep.
They've got a little gland back there on the near their tail, and they use that to waterproof their feathers. And I mean, a lot of times it just doesn't bother them. So I was like, they'll probably be all right. I was worried about my chickens though, because chickens, if they get, like you said with the cows, if they get wet,
Yeah.
and chickens, sometimes I'm like, wow, these animals are so smart. Look at them, their instincts and stuff. And then sometimes I'm like, man, these chickens are stupid. I mean, they're just dumb because they'll get up and, like, they're roosting in a tree right now because we've started to free range a bunch,
Uh
and
huh.
we've got the dog. The dog keeps every kind of predator away,
Hmm.
and that's a blessing and a problem at the same time because the chickens are free range and they don't want to go up at night. And so
Right.
we've only got a few dozen hens. It's like, man, just let them. We'll do the Easter egg hunt game, and we'll let them run around. They're eating less feed, whatever. But when it was going to snow, I did go out there and get them all up and put them underneath a roof area because one, it was easy because when chickens go to sleep, they go into that trance state
Yeah.
and you can kind of
Mhm.
just grab them. And
Yeah.
so I got them all up. And that first night when it was going to be raining and snowing and sleeting, I didn't want any of them dying of hypothermia from that. But then the ducks, they were just fine.
Yeah.
They just hung out and didn't even care. They got snowed on and they just shake it right off and almost looked like they enjoyed it. And which is crazy because I mean, we look at it and we're like, they have to be cold. Like they have to
Right.
be cold because they don't have any feathers on their legs. So you
Right.
think that like something's got to be up, but no, they literally couldn't care less. I mean, they just bust out there. So yeah, it's been crazy with all this cold weather.
Yeah, our chickens did fine. I built a wooden coop that's completely enclosed for them to go in and a little door to go in. But then on the outside of that, we've got a a, a metal fence. It's cage for them to go in, a big old cage for them, where they spend most of their time when they're not free range. And we've had a hard time with water freezing in the wintertime. It's always been, it gets cold and their water will freeze real easy.
Yeah.
And so we finally got smart. Sometimes it takes a while to get smart after you do the wrong thing long enough. so, so D goes, well, she goes, I'm gonna stick their water inside their enclosed coop and see how that does. And it's like, it's not freezing. The stuff outside that we've got these kiddie pools for the ducks, and those things freeze solid, and we have to break that up and give them fresh water or whatever. But the stuff inside the coop, it had a thin layer of ice on it that you could have stuck your finger through it, and so that's a big relief. Not carrying water out to them in the middle of winter. That's not fun.
Hmm.
So yeah, we learned. Like I said, it's 3 or 4 years of messing with frozen water, and you're like, oh, okay, let's move it where it's not going to freeze so easy. I mean,
Yeah.
duh, but you just don't think about it. And they're like in the cage, but it's in the open. There's no protection, and they're like on perch, and it's like you said, you just got to pluck them off and throw them in there because they ain't smart enough to get out of their own way.
Yeah.
But we had one. She just didn't like going in we had a different coop, and she'd just fly up to a low hanging branch above the coop and just stay there. And it's like and it's too high for me to reach her. So it's like, well, if you're going to be up there, you're going to be up there all night. And I
Yep.
came out one day, and it snowed the night before, and she looked like one of the cows with a big old coating of snow on her back. And I'm like, okay, that was your choice.
Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, they all. I mean, what the temperature got down in the upper teens. It didn't get too cold here, so really not an emergency for the chickens or the ducks or the cows or the donkeys or whatever other animals other than the dogs. You know, cats have a place to go, so they're fine. They just go into the shed with all the hay and stuff, and they just burrow a little spot in there, and they're fine as long as they can get out of the rain and the wind as well. They're fine. They got plenty of fur and they get fed, so it's not a problem.
That's something I think a lot of people don't realize with animals is the main thing is keeping them dry. I
Dry and
mean,
out of the
keeping them
wind.
dry and
Yep.
keeping that wind off of them. If you can
Hmm.
do those two, they're pretty much fine. I mean, it's just like us. I mean, I know it was either I think it was yesterday or day before yesterday. It was whenever it was the day after we had the snow.
Uh-huh.
and it warmed up to about 32 degrees, 33, 34. It, warmed up a little bit above freezing. I was walking around outside in shorts
Right.
because, the day before it was windy, there was snow, it was slushy, there was all kinds of stuff like that. And you felt so cold. But
Right.
then when the sun was shining, even though it was really cold outside, and I did have a hoodie on and everything, but, my legs, I didn't feel any cold in them because there wasn't no wind or moisture really sucking that heat out. And
Right.
so I think that's something that we don't realize enough is that as long as animals can stay dry and out of the wind, cold, I mean, they can handle it to a pretty severe degree
Yeah.
of just temperature wise. But
Mhm.
yeah, so yeah, talking about the winter water deal, I know that there's a lot of different options for it. I know there's heaters for water, which does require electricity. And
Mhm.
like you said, you can put it in a place where it's not going to freeze. And I know when we were doing a lot of rabbits, we used to keep enough water bottles because the thing for me is those automatic drinkers that have the pipes and everything. I tried that for a while and it would just freeze up all the
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
during the like if the rabbits were kind of rough on the nipples or there was a little bit of dust or something that would all the time be one of them would be leaking.
Mhm.
And I had mentioned in several videos when I was doing reviews on it that it might be that I just bought one that was a little bit cheaper and maybe I needed to buy one that was better quality. But at the same time, I think that you would have those issues with no matter how good a quality you bought. Unless
Right.
it's got some kind of heater in it and it's got something that automatically cleans it, or you go out there and clean it. So we got enough bottles to where we could keep warm bottles like in the bathtub or in the shower. And
Mhm.
then when it came time to change waters, we just took those ones that were frozen and went and put them in the bathtub and swapped out, the warm ones. And then
Right.
I had this little shed here is heated, and there is a stupid fly in here that I have not been able to get rid of. I think I got to get a swatter out here and kill that thing. He survived the cold, but yeah, they get water, anytime we put food out. Because the thing is that we've had days where you put the water out and it wouldn't be but maybe 10, 30 minutes after that, it's froze.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it would freeze in no time. And that's something else is if you got situations like that, you can get a heater and everything, but animals in the wild don't have access to water 100% of the time.
Right.
And so the way I like to think about it is it's like, well, water's necessary for digestion, so give them the water before you feed them, type
Mhm.
of deal. And so that's
Yeah.
that's worked for us. I don't know what your experience is with the cattle. How does that work? Do you keep heaters in your um, troughs and tanks, or
No.
how do you handle it?
No. Well, the way I do it, I've got water lines that run around my farm. Right now, they're still on top of the ground, so that doesn't work real well in the winter. So but once the temperature doesn't get below freezing, they're fine. They'll work fine.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna eventually bury them, obviously, and that'll winterize them quite a bit. But even then, it can be kind of a pain in the butt because I've got the bottom of a 55-gallon, like one of those blue plastic 55-gallon drums. It's cut in half, and that's their portable trough, and I've got a float valve in it. And I just hook it
Mhm.
up to water, to one of the water lines. But even then, when it's going to freeze at night, and I'm talking, like in November, it would freeze at night, and sometimes it would freeze at night, and like you said, animals sometimes don't have access to water all the time. Now, obviously, when you're raising cows and you're trying to do the best by them, you want to give them water whenever they want it. But sometimes I'll make sure that their bucket's full at night, and I'll shut the water off. I'll even remove the ball valve and the hose and everything and drain it. So in the morning, if they need water, and they usually don't drink that much when it's real cold out, especially at night when they're sleeping. It's really not an issue. And I'll go out in the morning, hook it all back up, and it works fine. Or sometimes if I'm lazy and it's going to warm up real quick, I won't even bother doing that. I'll know that, it's going to be 45 degrees by 10 o'clock in the morning. Everything's going to be thawed out by then, so I won't bother. But now, when it's constantly below freezing all the time, obviously serious winter temperatures, they have access to a pond. And so I make sure that this time of year they're grazing that close to that water access. And so they have access to that pond. And I've moved them today, so because they've pretty much grazed everything around that pond and that third of the farm, and I'm starting to move them further away. But all I'm going to do is build a lane back to that pond that they can go back and forth from grazing other parts of the farm, and they can get back there. But
Yeah.
another thing I'd mentioned earlier, and I actually read some research on. They've done some research on this, especially out west in where they get a lot of snow, especially Montana or Wyoming or whatever it is. You get a lot of, they get some snow in the winter. It's pretty cold. They've done research. They've gone a whole winter without giving them water when there's snow on the ground.
Hmm.
And they found absolutely no difference in body conditioning and performance over the winter. Now they still feed them, obviously, but these huge ranges with water tanks, they'll freeze solid, just like my problem, right? And it's a real hassle for them to get water out there. So they just let them, did some research, let them go all winter, and they were fine. They just eat the snow.
Yeah.
That's what the buffalo had to do, right? When
Oh
they're
my
out in the
goodness, have
middle
you
of the
not ever
prairie.
seen Survivor, man? You can't eat snow, you'll die.
Maybe a person,
Yeah,
but
maybe a person.
cows evolved that way, right? They didn't have somebody with a nice water bucket for them to drink out of, or a trough, or they
Yep.
might be a distance away from water. But if there's snow there, they can eat it and they'll do just fine. Now
Yep.
I try to accommodate them so they don't have to do
Right.
that, because that burns up a lot of their fuel on trying to stay warm by eating snow.
Hmm.
And so, you're going to either have to feed them more or give them access to water where they don't have to deal with it. So that's the way I deal with it. Now, I don't know other people do in colder weather. They've got heaters. They've got frost-free waterers, which is basically, it's kind of an insulated tank, and it's kind of got a hole in the top, and there's like this big old, it's a ball that sits in there, and the cow just pushes that ball in, and then the water comes up and they drink it. It's almost like a chicken water to some
Yeah.
extent, but it's able to stay not frozen during the winter. It's run on underground water, so that doesn't freeze. But they're expensive. And it's
Yeah.
like, it's like, okay, that's fine, but I'm not at the point where I want to spend thousands of dollars putting in those, and they have to be put on a certain pad, and it's got to be done a certain way. Supposedly, I don't know. I'll probably never get to the point where I'll use them, because one thing that makes their okay, yeah, a pond is not going to move, but during the other 9 or 10 months out of the year, the water's moving all across the property, so you can move the water with the cows, which when you rotationally graze, you have to do. If you just have a big field with one waterer in it, or one pond, and that's all they have access to, then that's fine, but that's not optimal for what I do, because you've got to keep those cows moving and on fresh grass, or grass that hasn't been grazed for a while, at least. I mean, even now they grazed it this fall. I'm put them on new grass today that they haven't been on for 2-3 months. It's kind of grazed down, but it's still, some of that winter grass still grows. It's still green. They love to eat it. I still feed them hay, but it's winter's not a lot of fun. But after being through a couple and knowing their nutritional needs, and kind of understanding that they don't need to be babied as much as you probably think they do, and cows, you know cows can use up some of their body fat during the winter, and they do when they get cold. So if nutritionally they're not as robust in the summer, they'll lose some weight. But the thing about it is, as soon as they have food, they'll put on an amazing amount of weight to make up for what they lost. It's called compensatory gains, and it's like you can count
Mhm.
on, a cow that maybe lost a little bit of weight over the winter. When they hit that spring grass, they'll put on 3 to 4 pounds a day. Boom, boom, boom. They'll be right back up where they were in a matter of a couple weeks. It's not ideal, but it's also not a deal breaker. They'll put the weight back on, and they'll be fine, and they're just as healthy as they've always been. They just burn some of that body fat off. That's all it is. Stay
Yeah.
fit.
Well, and that's used to how everything was in a natural setting, and I'm not so sure that we need to stray from that too much because if you think about it, the only times like us as humans would have had access to carbohydrates, for example, would have been in the fall when you have certain types of native fruits and some tubers and stuff like that that you've got access to where we could actually put some fat on because during the
Mhm.
winter a lot of times even though we'd have access to meat and stuff, people would go kind of hungry. You wouldn't starve, but you might
Right.
be on a little bit of a fasting, spree there. And then when spring comes around, that flush of new life and everything puts weight back on people. I've actually heard Joel Salatin talk about what you're talking about, and they go through a lean period,
Uh-huh.
and the cows just basically put on frame as far as bones and everything, according to what I remember anyway. And then
Mhm.
that's like you said, that spring grass, it would just pack on the weight in no time, and they didn't feed a whole lot of hay. I've noticed. I started keeping ruminants. I've had ruminants before, but I really don't count it as like I kept them and have experience with them because they were just a couple of goats. I was
Uh-huh.
something. I think I was 16, 17 years old, and I kept a bunch of chickens, and my mom always wanted some goats, and so I got her a couple of goats for Mother's Day, and they were just basically pets. So I mean,
Right.
of course, we took care of them and everything, but it wasn't like I was breeding goats and real doing rotational grazing or whatever. They had a pen and they got
Mhm.
fed hay and feed and stuff
Right.
like that. But I know that keeping the ruminants now, the lambs that I've got three of them, and I'm moving around in a tractor. And when they were eating grass during the summer, I'm talking about it'd be hot out, and I'd fill up their water trough, which is just a little bowl,
Uh-huh.
and they weren't drinking any of it hardly. And I said, well, I wonder if it's all coming from the grass. That's what I thought. I thought they
Right.
must be getting moisture from the grass. And then once I had talked to one of the individuals that I got sheep from, she said, well, maybe the water's, she was like, really? She's like, maybe the water's too hot. But they had a pasture, I don't think, where they were really rotationally grazing, and they fed a lot of hay and feed.
Uh-huh.
So their sheep were drinking a lot, and she said that if it was hot, they didn't want it. It had a big old trough out in the field, but it was right in the middle of the sun too. So
Mhm.
I checked mine. I started checking the water temperature. It would be nice and cool because it was underneath the little shaded part of the tractor that they've got,
Mhm.
and they just weren't drinking it. The funniest thing is now is we really don't have pasture. We're not doing what you're doing yet,
Right.
where you've really got that just sweet stuff. If we did have what you had with just sheep, we probably wouldn't have to feed any hay. We could
Right.
just move through, and they could eat what was left over from the summer and fall growth.
Right.
But having to feed hay now because the hay is so dry, they drink water like nobody's
Oh yeah.
business.
Yeah.
And I
Yep.
mean, they suck it down. And so normally what I've been trying to do, and I haven't done a lot of research on it, and I need to as far as with ruminants goes, is how much water, like, can they drink a good bit of water at one time and then be good for a while? That's what my
Mhm.
instinct tells me, like a lot of my other
Mhm.
animals. But considering that
Right.
they kind of ruminate, it makes me think, well, can they? But I think if they have the intake with it, I mean, all they're doing is basically puking everything up, chewing it, and then swallowing it again.
Right.
So I
Right.
wouldn't think. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts are on that because What we've been doing is right before we give them, more hay, or we try to refill their water about 2 times a day if it is freezing.
Hmm.
Um, but most of the time we can fill it up just once. They empty it, and we refill it.
Right. Yeah. They don't seem to drink. Um, Obviously as much as in the summer because that's really they drink a lot during the summertime. But I've noticed they'll go down to the pond, but it doesn't, they're what I'm more surprised of in the wintertime is they don't eat they hardly touch their minerals in the wintertime. Now in the summer they're just going through it, drinking a lot of water, taking up the salt, taking up the kelp that I give them, and now it's like they I look, I go, well, y'all barely touched this. There might be a nose print in there or something, but I'm like, they just aren't taking up the minerals in the wintertime. And I think that is also a sign that they're not drinking as much either, right? The more they drink, the
Yeah,
more they're flushing those minerals out, just like us when we're drinking Gatorade or whatever, and increasing our hydration, with salt. It just you're just going to uptake more of it. But when, in the wintertime, and another thing is like hay's expensive, when you're buying 100 bales at a time, you know, and I'm like I'm a little stingy. I make sure they get enough to eat, right? Because they got pasture to eat too. But I want to give them some decent hay in case they're hungry, and I give them alfalfa pellets every day, and I'll put it out, and they eat about half of what I put down, and especially this time of year, and they're like, "This is a really good place to lay down," and they'll just lay down on top of their hay, and it's like, well, I go, well, I shouldn't give you that much if you're just gonna lay on it. I figured if they were hungry, they'd eat all of it, but it's like they just lay on it, and it's like this is especially with the snow. I put it on top of the snow. It's like they'll eat a little
oh
bit, they'll
yeah,
just lay right on top of it. It's like okay, I see what y'all are doing. So yeah, but yeah, they adjust real well to the weather. I I'm much more comfortable with taking them through the winter after a couple winters now, after seeing how they do, and they don't bat an eyelash. They're not stressed out. They get more stressed out in the summer than they do in the winter with the
yeah.
heat. You know,
Well,
with
how
the
how much of your pasture do you think has got winter grass right now? I mean, are there any parts of it that are kind of dead, or does it all look green because that those grasses have come in and filled that gap, or do you think
well,
they're
no,
getting a lot of green?
I mean, there's still some green there. There's still green for them. There's not a lot of it. It's
Yeah,
maybe I maybe got 3 or 4 inches in some spots. Some of them, they on the last pass through a couple months ago. They the thing is they're able to eat enough to be full, but the nutritional quality is not where it was. Obviously, they're selective. The first
yeah.
time through back, or after the fall, maybe the October is where the last time they were on the spot they're on now. They ate all the clover out of there. They ate all the good stuff that they like, and then I moved them and they left some of it. Well, what they left is not the most nutritious stuff. It's still okay for them to eat. It's old fescue, it's old orchard grass that's just kind of hanging on. It's still green, but
Yeah.
it's not it's not growing, therefore it's not very nutritious. And that's why I supplement with alfalfa, and that's why I'll give them good hay because there's stuff for them to eat, but it's not the most nutritious. So I'm really thinking that that's probably, like I said, after a couple years of doing this, as long as they're not getting bony and losing weight, I'm figuring I'm doing what they need, and they're not because sometimes I know when they're hungry or I'm not feeding them enough. I mean, my pasture's right outside my back door practically, and I'll walk out on the porch and they'll see me and they'll start belly aching and mooing at me like you need to bring food. Yeah, start complaining, and the donkeys will start whining and whinnying, and I'm like, okay, okay, I guess I didn't give you enough yesterday or whatever. So they let you know. It's a good experience though to kind of go through it and understand. You're a little overcautious when you first start out, as you should be. But then you go, okay, well, they did just fine. On one bale of hay a day instead of two. You know,
Mhm.
and like when it's really cold, I'll give them 2 bales, When it's a normal day, I'll give them 1. If I put them on new grass where they don't really need any hay for a day or 2 after they've gotten all the good bits out, then that's fine, and, so it's all I'm still learning, I mean, and I think everybody in the business that's honest would say they're all constantly learning something new about their animals, about their pasture, about their chickens, about their ducks, about their goats and rabbits and whatever they have because you're the weather changes, their needs change, and you change.
Mhm.
Your time that you invest in them changes from time to time, and you need to know that you're taking care of them, and that you know if I leave for a day and I'm not there, they're not going to die. They're going to be fine. It's kind of like the first you get a puppy, you're
Yeah, that makes me because I remember when I started really researching sheep before I was getting sheep. I watched a lot of Greg Judy stuff. He talked about how sheep don't drink as much as other livestock, from what I remember. And I wondered if maybe once we've got the sheep to where they can move around on more green pastures, that if their water intake might go down in the winter,
Mhm.
because we are giving them. I mean, pretty much that's all they're eating right now is hay. And luckily, I've only got 3 sheep, but on top of that, my neighbor had some fields where he didn't get up some pieces that I got to go over there, and he said, "Hey, you want to come over and get this?" I said, "Sure." He had a couple of little small bales, some of them about
Mhm.
like that, and some of them about like that, that
Mhm.
he's just not going to fool with. And I got all that, and I've got enough to feed them all winter.
Right.
And, I mean, so it's no big deal for me, but I have noticed that as they've been eating just the dry stuff, they do drink more now than they did in the summer. And in the summer, they'd go over there and they make this little tiny slurping sound, and all 3 of them would drink until their heart was content, and the whole thing would move down like that much. And it's only like maybe a 5-gallon little tub that they're
Uh-huh.
drinking out of. And so, because I mean, my neighbor, he's got cattle. Well, 2, 3 neighbors have cattle.
Uh-huh.
And you see if you ever go and watch a cow drink, it's quite a sight to behold.
It's
Yeah, it's
impressive.
yeah, you think you're thirsty sometimes. You see somebody take the water. I've done it before. You take a water bottle and you force it all in,
Mhm.
and you can drink a whole water bottle in, maybe uh 2 or 3 seconds, but you see a
Mhm.
cow and it's like they can drink, 4 gallons in that time. It seems
Yeah.
like the way they drink.
I think I read somewhere that during the summer when it's really hot, they'll drink about 25 to 30 gallons of water a day when it's
Wow.
hot. When it's hot. Now that's probably hot and there's probably no shade.
Yeah.
I don't I mean, mine could be drinking that much. I tell you what, since I actually have part of my pasture, um, and I just run on city water, right? I don't have a well. I just have a pond, and I'm gonna fix that eventually once that pond starts holding water a little bit better, and I can store up some of that water in a container in a tote, and then gravity feed it. But I don't know what happened in September, whether I had a leak or what, but my water bill went through the roof. it's normally it's normally 60 or $70, and it was like $300, and I'm like,
Oh
whoa,
wow.
what happened? So I'm gonna like, okay, I need to keep a little tighter rein on this because what'll happen is sometimes they'll get in that bucket and it's a yellow ball valve in there, a float valve, and they'll get in there and they'll whack on it, and sometimes they'll mess it up, and then it just overflows and it won't shut off. So I've always constantly keep doing that. I don't know why I did. Anyway, uh, but I have to keep a constant eye, or they'll waste water, and that was an expensive lesson in September. Because I look at my bill, and you know how they have those bar charts of how much you consume every month. I'm like, whoa, where? So either I wasn't washing a lot of cars or anything, so I don't know where it went to, but it went to the cows, and I have a feeling I spilled a lot of it, unfortunately, but that's life. So,
Yeah,
but
water.
go
No,
ahead.
I was gonna say that yeah, water can be expensive if you're on the city, especially if you got something like cows. Now, smaller livestock doesn't consume a whole lot, but
Mhm.
because I know one year we did all rainwater. Now we didn't have a
Uh-huh.
whole lot of animals, but we did all rainwater. And if you
Mhm.
set up a really good system, you can do the majority of rainwater. I think it's probably a little harder to do with cattle. Maybe if you got one or two cows and you have a pretty large system, but
Yeah.
having a well, a pond, could definitely be a huge help. But that's what we plan on doing. I'm really debating on our property whether or not we're gonna do city water or whether we're gonna see about getting a well drilled. I don't know what wells are going for right now. And it depends on the state. It depends on how
Save your
far down they got to
pennies.
go.
Yeah.
And I know it seems like I recall somebody recently that I knew that was building a house. They were going to have the well cleaned out, and the guy told him and said, like, hey, look, I can go down here and I can re-drill this well. He said, but if there's any kind of wood in it, he said, my bit's going to get stuck and I can't do it.
Mhm.
And so he was like, it's going to cost you just as much for me to redo this well as it would for me to dig you a new well.
Wow.
And I want to say that where it was at, it had to go down about 100 feet. And this guy was charging, I think it was $2,400 to drill it. I think that was just to drill it. I don't know if that included the cost to put the sleeve in and to put the pump in. And I'm hoping that's what the price is. I'm hoping that's not just a pipe dream of mine here in
That's
my area, because that's pretty dang
that's
cheap. Everywhere
that's
else I hear it's like upward of 7,000 and more.
yeah. Yeah, because I have, I live on top of a ridge, so it doesn't make sense that I'm gonna have to drill down the first 100 feet to be normal, and then probably 100 more feet to hit water. Since
Yeah.
I'm on a ridge, I've got to get down to the water table, which is
Yep.
probably 100 feet below where I'm at, and then try to drill. You know,
Yep.
so um, so I mean, I've heard people, all in with all of the pump, the well, the casings that go in, rerouting your water to your house, that can be 10, 20, $25,000.
Hmm.
And guess what? Guess how expensive it is if they don't hit water. They got to do it
Oh
all
yeah.
over again in another spot. So you just You know,
Well,
your pump and connection cost doesn't change, but the drill cost,
oh yeah.
because it's like, well, you want us to try another one? It's like, well, you just went through $5,000 of mine without hitting water. I don't know if I want you to do that again.
Hmm.
So I would love to have a well. I would love to have a well. Um, if somebody could guarantee me for $10,000 to hit water and set it up for me,
Yeah.
I'd do it tomorrow. But I'm afraid it's going to be way more than that. Just because by virtue of where we live on that
Yeah.
ridge. And so, if
Absolutely.
if I was in some flatter land like down in Alabama, up in for context for everybody, I'm up in southern Tennessee, and it's kind of hilly up here. But if I was on flat ground or flatter ground where there's a reasonable expectation you could hit a water table, at 100 feet,
Hmm.
pretty much anywhere you drill. Um, yeah, then I might want to do that. But yeah, where I'm at, it's just doesn't, I haven't won the lottery yet. And and they're not the government stopped handing out those COVID checks, so I don't have that money to rely on. So hopefully they never have to do that again.
Yeah, no more
But
stimmies for
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
think how you know everybody. I thought it was just us suffering economically for a while there,
uh-huh,
and then like as you talk to more and more people, it's like, no, wait a minute, life sucks for everybody now. Even
yes,
I mean, or it's at least worse than it was. And
right,
I mean, I know a lot of people all were like, "Woo, I got my stimmy," but then it has hurt us economically in
yeah,
so many ways.
yeah,
And
of
it's,
course,
yeah,
that's
the price of stuff going up. Because I got to thinking about it, I was like, well, things are not that much more expensive, but when everything goes up, it
right,
accumulates and it just
right,
it's hard. But yeah, with the well, the only reason I started considering it is I had some people mention it to me, and I was, for the same reason that you mentioned, I was like, oh heck no, no, we are never doing a well. Too much money. It costs like
hmm
$1,000 to get a meter, and so
hmm
we'll just pay for water, or we'll do rainwater catchment too. But as I started looking at it, where we have our property, we've got two options. We can either run it. They'll have to run a line through a creek, which and up a hill
hmm
and way up to the house. It's going to be like at least 1,000 foot of pipe or more.
ah, yeah,
And then on the other side, we'll have to do about another 1,000 foot of pipe. Well, maybe 500,
hmm
and we've got to go over everybody else's water lines,
oh,
and plus the meter, and there's there's going to be all kinds of complications from either side. And my neighbor that's just down from me, it's in a low spot too, but he had a well put in, and according to him, the guy that put it in said he was getting enough water to be able to do a few chicken houses.
wow, that's a lot of
Yeah,
water.
so that when he said that, I was kind of like, well, maybe I need to get a well. And
Well,
so, we're looking at that, and depending on your location, it's all dependent on that. I know I follow along with a lot of the Permy stuff and Paul Wheaton and his um, property up there in Montana, and they finally went in and put a well in, and it was like upwards of $60,000,
yeah,
and
hmm
they ended up having to spend a little. I think they ended up spending like close to like 80 or 100 when all said and done, which is
right,
just
right,
insane. But now they do have all the water they want now, and he is running a big operation up there. There's a lot of people living on that property, and they've
hmm
got plans for it. But still, that's freaking $60,000 or more. I mean, that used to be a house,
right.
to get well water.
Well, they have, if you're a rancher or a farmer or you qualify for agricultural land, I think the government will pitch in and help you put in a well if you don't have access to water. Um, I don't know that for certain, and I think maybe in
Mhm.
certain states like Wyoming and Montana that are 90% ag land, maybe 95% ag land, or just unusable because it's mountains.
Yeah.
Um, I think those my brother lives in Wyoming and they've got an interesting water situation out there that, everybody uh it's almost like it's probably before your time back in the 70s when they rationed gas, because stupid oil policies or whatever, it was like depending on the last number on your license plate, odd or even, you could go to the gas station that day. And if you didn't have that odd or even, you're on the wrong day. You'd have to wait till tomorrow to get the water. And
Yep.
then that's kind of the way they do it. They ration out the water out in Wyoming because that's super dry out there, and a well and water is super super valuable. So they have a very complex way they regulate the water out there. But if you're if you got to run an agricultural land, and you're using a big, if you've seen those big irrigation pivots, that go around in a
Mhm.
circle, those things are pumping out. thousands and thousands and thousands of gallons of water. So those are deep wells, and those are only drilled in certain places where there's probably an aquifer under there that they're not going to run out of water. Because groundwater is fine as long as it's raining. But when you in those arid areas, they got to go deep to
Yeah.
get to that good water. That's been there since the dinosaurs were here. Um, I suppose I don't know, but yeah, it's so
Dinosaurs are the lizard people. One.
one. Yeah, we'll take either one at this point, but um, but anyway, yeah. So everybody, depending on the part of the world you live in or the part of the country you live in, water policy. Well, we don't even have to get into what's going on in California and water policy there, but it's critical. So,
Yeah.
people listening in, depending on where you're at, or you're thinking of getting a homestead or, thinking of going off grid or thinking about all these things, depending on where you live and the regulations and the state laws on water are important to consider
Yeah.
for sure, um, because I've seen, uh, in some of these really dry areas, and and we won't address the fires in California, but it's a very arid area. It's a very brittle environment. It's not
Yeah.
that they don't get rain; it's when they get rain, it's all at once, and
Yep.
then it won't rain for 8 months. So that calls for what smart people would do is store the water when it rains and then feed it
Hmm.
out when it's dry. Of course, the policy out there will not allow that. Um, but there's one guy I was watching. He was building an off-grid home in Arizona, out in the desert, and but he just built this huge. Gosh, I don't know how many square. It had to been 2,000 square foot. It was like an awning, like 2 feet off the ground. Just so it had enough angle, and then ran gutter along one side, and then that fed his huge rainwater tanks. Those big,
Yeah.
500-gallon huge tanks, or 1,000 or 2,000 gallon, and that would fill up when it rained. And that's what he used the rest of the time when it didn't rain. But he had to have this huge capture area that he had to build, which is actually kind of smart. It's like, because he only had a tiny house, right? There wasn't a whole lot of water go come off of that thing and take care of
Mhm.
him. But it was this big, huge, and then it was kind of funny. And then when it would rain, he would like go out in the middle of the night and film it. But
Yeah.
out in the desert, when it rains, it washes and it's dangerous, man. It's just the water just courses through and washes all the dirt away, and and it's all sand, so there's no rock there to hold that ground from washing away, and it's pretty bad, unless you do some permaculture stuff and put in some swales and stuff and retain that water. It's not a very forgiving environment there.
Yeah, that's the thing you were talking about regulations and everything. I mean, yeah, out there in California, yeah, I mean it's illegal to collect, the rainwater.
Right.
And I mean, I always like to refer to what Jeff Lawton says about that when they want to regulate water, or they want to regulate how much cows um, drink or whatever it is. He always says, like he says something to the effect of like, "What do they think we're doing? Shooting it out into outer space? Like it's gonna go through our system and it's going back into the water table. It's not like we're gonna hold on to it and put it in a
Right.
tank and close it off from the rest of the world forever.
Right.
Like you've got
Right.
to now. I mean, I understand that with certain streams, rivers, like interrupting fishes, uh, migrating patterns, or I mean whatever it is with that. I mean, I get, or like doing something that's going to negatively affect your neighbor. I get that stuff, but it's just silly to me to think like, oh, you can't own the rain that falls on your house. Like
Right.
that's stupid. I mean,
Right. Right. Because you can use that, and we'll use California. I get the politics of the whole thing because it's just crazy out there. But when you're able to retain that water, Number one, allowing some of it to actually penetrate the soil and actually, hydrate the soil and actually keep the plants alive and growing and green all throughout the
Hmm.
year and take away a lot of the fuel and dead wood that's sitting out there that nobody else, and they won't allow them to clean up because I don't know why, but you know that ground will start absorbing more and more water and be less fire. I mean, you're
Hmm.
never going to stop. The thing is there's people out there, no amount of policy or planning or any of that stuff is ever going to stop wildfires in California. It's a part of the natural ecosystem there, but you can mitigate the damage, right? And that's what
Hmm.
they should be. Okay, because some people, I'm watching. It's like they didn't leave, and they just had hoses in their backyard just watering the perimeter of their houses around and all of the vegetation and grass, and it's like the house right next to them on both sides burned down. It's like, well, gee, what if you had 2,000 gallons of stored water from last winter when it rained so much? And you're like, okay, I'm good. What if everybody did that? There's whole hillsides that would have never burned. It would never
No, that
got
would make people too independent, John. We don't want them to be independent.
right. And I'm just like, and I don't want to get off on the, but we are talking about water here, so I think I'm within my bounds to talk about it. But I also fault, and this I also fault the people that actually live there, because it's not their fault, but they can't really blame anybody but themselves. It's like when you're putting over concrete pads, roads, houses, you put in drains to drain off all the water that runs in the street, you know, you're basically putting a cap on that landscape and not letting any water get into it. And so the stuff you grow in the dry season, that stuff's just like a match. It just goes off like crazy. And it's like you're way too densely packed in. I realize it's some of the most beautiful area in the country, but you've packed yourself in so tight that you don't let water penetrate the landscape and give you some
Mhm.
sort of fire protection. I mean, I would say, they're saying, well, you can rebuild here and we're going to expedite the process and we're going to do away with all the red tape. I said, if I'm an insurance company, why would you ever insure that if they're not going to properly take, safeguards, normal safeguards to keep that landscape hydrated and living and growing,
Mhm.
but they won't. I mean, I do not feel sorry for somebody that rebuilds and go, you know what? I can't find anybody that'll insure me. You're right. And they shouldn't. And for God's sakes, the government shouldn't require them to give insurance to people like that. That's
Right.
stupid. They already subsidize insurance like that in other coastal areas. It's like, well, you gotta give them insurance, so we'll subsidize part of the cost. It's like, oh well, hurricane wiped my house out 3 times and they rebuilt it. Well, that's just stupid.
Well,
And
well, and I was going to say, the crazy thing about it is these people. Now, I can't speak for everywhere in the country,
right.
but I know some people that were recently affected by the hurricanes up in North Carolina,
Hmm.
and I've known uh, situations here down in Alabama. We got tons of tornadoes, and people are constantly having to fight with insurance companies. But the crazy thing is the insurance, they'll subsidize it. They'll insure these people in these crazy places. I mean they insure against tornadoes and everything. But then what's crazy is sometimes the insurance just doesn't pay, and then
Yeah.
they just keep. I mean it's unbelievable. I think if we could get rid, which it's one of those things, it's like when you talk about getting rid of Social Security.
Hmm.
I try to stick to homesteading on my channel just because I like
Right.
stuff that gives good information that people can actually do, like keeping 2,000 gallons of water in your yard. So that way, if a wildfire comes through, you don't burn to death.
Right.
Like I like that side of it, but at the same time, I mean, there are certain realities that we live in, and one of the things is it's like talking about getting rid of Social Security. Everybody's like, no, no, we could never do that. But at the same time, it's like, well, you know, my great 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 grandchildren are going to pay for my dad's Social Security. I
Right.
mean, it's like it's a Ponzi scheme that they're never going. That money that you put in is never going back. Same thing with insurance. If you could get rid of a lot of that stuff, we would be able to heal economically in a lot of different ways. Now, it would hurt horrible in that first, few years or first few decades, but it would eventually heal and we'd be in a better spot. And I think that's why specifically the topic of homesteading has just gotten so big on social media and YouTube, and with a lot of people that are kind of trying to get out of the whole, dependent on government or um being real into politics and everything. They're getting into that stuff because it gives you that independence and it gets you to a place to where you don't have to um, live in that world as much. I mean, we still
Right.
live in it, but you don't have to live in it as much. And just having water stored up, I think if I could go, you always talk about if you could go back and redo everything. If I could go back to where before I blew all my money on fishing stuff when I was a teenager, and I could just save up and get a property, the first thing I would do is just be like, I'm going to get as much water on this property as I possibly can. I want every drop that I can get, and I want to hold on to it as long as I can, because the thing is I'm not going to let my land suffer. So some people would think like, oh, well, if somebody hoards the water, then it's going to affect everybody else. It's like rain falls just about everywhere in your area. And if you'll just hold on to it, once I let that water go and I use it to save my plants and my animals and everything, guess what? It goes into the ground, it goes downstream, it goes to everybody else's property. I
Right.
can't just hold on to it. There's
Yes.
no way to hoard it. I mean, you could, but nobody wants to spend that kind of money and get no benefit. If you just hoard the water, unless we go into Mad Max. If you go into Mad Max and then you've got all the water hoarded up, you could be a warlord. But I mean, other than that, you would get no benefit from just hoarding water.
Yeah, the water doesn't disappear, and you just have to do a real simple test. Go drink a gallon of water and see how long you can retain that.
That- that's what they need to do with all the politicians that are passing these types of laws. We just go and we put them into a room and we say, "All right, everybody, here's your glass of water," and you drink it. We'll be like, "All right, now you got to hold that for 7 days, okay?"
Hmm.
And then you just leave them there, and then by the end of it, they're all like, "Yeah, well, sign the bill. We're gonna get rid of that."
Yeah, it doesn't magically just disappear into outer space. Jeff Lawton's right. It's like no, it cycles through the environment this the way it always has, right? It's just taking a couple different detours, that maybe
Yeah.
it did a couple thousand years ago. But yeah, it's water policy. I think we're fortunate where we live. We get plenty of rain. It's a
Mhm.
buddy of mine is a big backpacker. He moved from Arizona to Tennessee, and he's like, one of the main concerns when I'm backpacking is how much water do I need to carry, and is there water along the way? It's like water is everything. It's like I'm in Tennessee. It's like there's streams. You're going, you're hiking. There's all sorts of water everywhere you go. He says it's not an issue. It's like so nice not to have to worry about that like you do in the out in the desert. Which is like that's about all you think about the whole time. Am I going to run out of water? So but yeah, I mean, we're fortunate where we live. We get, 50, I think we average about 55 inches of rain a year, which is a lot. It's some people, would love to have that in a decade that we get in a year, you know. But, so it's the landscape is hydrated. It's, Tennessee and Alabama, it's green, except in the winter. But it's very green, it's very lush, and that's a big bonus when somebody's looking for a place to, or if they want to relocate for homestead, it's like, how much actually falls from the sky, number one? Yeah, water policy there, but do you actually get a lot of rain? So you're not watering your yard or your garden or your trees all year round because it's so dry. It just naturally falls from the sky. And it's a great thing. So um, that's something to think if anybody's thinking of relocate.
Absolutely. Water's life. I don't know of any life forms that live without water. That's for sure. So, some of them live on less, but
Yes.
there ain't none of them that live on no water.
Yep. Yep.
Well, awesome, John. We're right at an hour. This has been a great discussion of just
Yep.
water in general. But I guess you want to tell everybody where they can find you. Anybody who might see this later on.
Yeah, no, I don't have a YouTube channel, but I am on X at Soul Survivor 78. My name's Farmer John, so you'll know if you're in the right account. So you can find me there, and on our weekly homesteading from scratch. Is that the name of it? I got to get the name right. The one we do.
That's what Greg has been calling it. I came
Okay.
up with that title for one of our podcast or YouTube lives, whatever, and
Yep.
he ran with it, and that's been what it's been called ever since. So,
Gotcha.
which
Cool.
pretty good title for it, because I mean that's pretty much what we do is we sit around and talk about how, well, if I had it all to do over again,
Yeah.
and I
Well,
was just starting out.
Well, we're all still learning, and
Yep.
that's the important thing. It's we're not sitting up there like you said on a throne. Yeah, we've been doing this forever. Listen to us. We're just
Yep.
like anybody else, going one day at a time.
Yep. And so this is only on my channel, so there's no need really for me to talk about mine. I'm Hideaway Homestead on YouTube. You can find me, you can email me at hideawayhomestead@gmail.com, but I will give a shout out there to Greg. We normally stream this to his channel as well. The Tinker Tribe, you can check him out on YouTube. You can also check him out over on Take the Ride on YouTube. He does daily workouts. He has, for over a year now, been working on his mental and physical and spiritual health, and he's been taking a journey on that and been documenting mostly the physical part of it. But he's got a bunch of good stuff, so go check him out, and hopefully he'll be joining us again next week. But I appreciate it again, John. I hope you have a good week, and hopefully we won't freeze again next Monday.
Hope not. All right, man. Later.
Take it easy, buddy. Let's see here in the live.